Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also be on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really means a lot to me personally. Before I introduce our guest, Rose Hayden-Smith, who's going to talk about victory gardens and sustainable agriculture in general, I want to talk about how gardening has really sort of grown so much. People sort of having supplemental gardens in their backyards, hopefully their front yards too, on their balconies, on their rooftops, windowsills, etc. since the pandemic has begun. And I was reading this really interesting article that Reuters put out. The authors' names are Christopher Woljanek and Tom Polancek, and they were talking about how this is really happening not just in the United States, but really all over the world, from places as diverse as Russia to Singapore. It's created this huge demand for seeds. Seed companies were experiencing a lot of sort of their own trauma as people rushed to buy seeds in March. Johnny Seeds in Maine experienced a 270% jump in orders the week of March 16th when the lockdowns and shutdowns began. So it's inspiring to me that people are taking sort of their food power back into their own hands. And folks like Leah Penniman, who is the head of Soulfire Farm and has written some amazing books about people of color and their return to farming in so many ways. It can be such a tool for creating social change. And so I just want to give the authors of that Reuters piece a shout out, give new and beginning farmers and gardeners a shout out right now, because they're taking that power back into their own hands. And while our backyard gardens will likely never be able to provide all of our caloric and nutritional needs, it is a really interesting use of our time right now, right? If you have kids, you can incorporate it into lesson plans. If you're sort of by yourself, it's a good way to meditate and learn a new skill. So there are so many, I think, benefits from planting your own sort of food source and enjoying it. I've been doing it, this is the first time in a long time, because I used to travel so much, that I've been able to grow anything. So my husband and I have been, he's been doing it. He's been building raised garden beds for us, and we're planting, everything we can think of. But it's been a sort of way to get the noise out of my head and have something to do that makes me feel good. So that's why I'm really glad that Rose is with us today. Rose Hayden-Smith is currently an educational technology fellow at the organization Extension, which she can tell us more about later. She is also an emeritus historian at the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources. And she was an advisor there as well. And she is the founder of Shine Communications. Rose has been a longtime friend to Food Talk, and really amazing mentor and advocate, and somebody who sort of has lifted us up in so many ways. So Rose, before we begin, just thank you for all that you've done for Food Tank and for me personally over the years. It's a joy to see you.
Oh, thank you. It's such a joy to see you, and thank you for having me on. I love your work. Everything that Food Tank is doing is fabulous. Thank you.
That's so sweet. So you wrote this book called Sowing the Seeds of Victory, and you've recently been giving a number of talks and been quoted in articles on victory gardens and sort of the history of crisis gardening, which is a term that I just learned in the U.S., and how it relates to the pandemic. So I'm hoping you can sort of give us maybe a little bit of history lesson of what crisis gardening is, and how this is not the first time that folks have turned to growing their own food in a sort of scary and uncertain time.
Yeah, I mean, people have turned to gardens in times of crisis, forever, right? But some of the things that I think are really informative to us are particularly in the 1890s and 1893, there was an economic downturn. And so in Detroit, Mayor Hazen Pingree, with a group of very creative people, came up with this idea of vacant lot garden cultivation, and it was called the Potato Patch, the Detroit Experiment Potato Patch Farms, and these spread all over the United States. And by 1896, I think there were 19 major U.S. cities that had vacant lot cultivation associations, right? There was a national association. So people gardened then. People obviously gardened during both World War I and World War II, during the Great Depression. Some of the things that I see, when we had a surge of gardening during the last economic downturn, right? It was also,
I don't remember like people doing it as much as they did now. Can you
no.
Go into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I think now is, I have not seen anything like it before in the about 30 years that I worked for Extension. I haven't seen anything like this in terms of the interest, and I think it's kind of like almost like a perfect storm where and it actually reminds me a lot of parallels to the sort of Victory Garden program of World War I, because people were genuinely concerned about food supply. And there was also a pandemic going on that also didn't have drug solutions, right? There were no antivirals, no antibiotics. And I think that this people seem to be doing it not only about anxiety about food supply, but as something that's restorative. I talked to a group at Rutgers University, and they were framing it as their climate victory gardens, because they're very concerned about climate change. I have been talking a lot with faith communities, and they're framing it as good news gardens. Talked to a group yesterday, and they were calling them hope gardens. But I think people are anxious. I obviously intersect with a lot of people who are using gardening as a way to expand the home classroom. Right. But I am shocked at how many people have anxiety about the food supply. And I had a couple of people tell me, if I can't get toilet paper, does that mean I'm not going to be able to get food in the future?
Right.
And obviously, yeah. But I think it's also driving an interest in local foods.
Right.
Which I think is going to be a big winner, sort of like the local food and regional food movement coming out of this thing. I talked to someone at my CSA about a week and a half ago, and they're like, we've never had this many people, with the CSA. And that's actually, I don't know about other people, but our CSA has been very little disruption, right?
Right. Yeah. I talk about my CSA all the time on this podcast, and Bernie makes fun of me. But I think, they've never had as many customers, as you said, as before. And there have been no disruptions. And the food is very high quality, very different than what I'm getting at the grocery store right now. And, so you're sort of taking what you can get. But the CSA quality or the farmer's market quality is so much higher right now.
Oh, it's fantastic. And it's kind of interesting because another way that I gauge interest is I used to run a master gardener program for cooperative extension. So I have a lot of friends who still work in master gardener programs across the United States. And so I know some people at Oregon State University, and they have an online vegetable gardening program. It's virtual, and they sort of opened that up and made it available. And I think in the first 2 weeks they had something seriously like 17,000 registrations. They were mentioned in an NPR story. They had 100,000 new visitors to their websites, and everywhere that I talked to master gardener people, they said it's just the interest is really high. And I also see it too on social media. And, that's one of the things that's really interesting to me, because in studying World War One victory gardens, the poster art is a big deal. And I have a whole chapter in my book about poster art. And, even during the sort of Obama years, especially when the Obamas put in that garden at the White House, that was 2009. Facebook was relatively new, and we didn't even have Instagram. And what I'm seeing now too is being really fueled by social media. And I keep looking at Instagram and going, wow, in some ways it reminds me of the effort to use posters to promote gardening and food conservation during World War One and World War II. It's really interesting to me right now.
That's an interesting evolution for sure. And I like, what you had to say about online vegetable gardening classes having so much interest. We've talked to folks at the Rodale Institute, and they're getting, they're putting a lot of more information online for free and really showing people how to grow more fruits and vegetables. So it's really kind of exciting that all of these online resources exist and that are available to people. It's much easier than, obviously in 2009 or, during World War One, for people to get information and really know how to do this in creative ways, no matter where they live.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. The wealth of free information online is, and one of the neatest things that I've seen for kids is Texas A&M runs a national program. It's actually even international, called Junior Master Gardener. And as soon as this happened, they pivoted, and they have been doing these fabulous Facebook Live events for kids all around gardening, and then archiving them. And that's just been absolutely wonderful to see. And those are free, right? There's some great free resources there.
Such a great way to help parents sort of get through these. I mean, I know everyone loves their kids, but these are very long days for parents right now who are sort of like trying to teach, trying to, work remotely if they can, and then also, feed their kids and have fun with them. So I think it's such a great way to bring families together in different ways.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I am, wondering if the school garden movement will get, another surge of interest once we're sort of getting back to whatever the new normal is. And, and I do wonder what the new normal is going to be for the food system.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question we're all kind of wondering, and whether, I've sort of taken this side of not saying new normal anymore, because I don't want anything that resembles what we had before. I think there were so many inequities and so many, problems with the way that food was being produced and consumed and distributed, and you're just sort of how policymakers looked at or didn't look at food and agriculture. I think that all needs to change. So I think, getting folks interested in gardening is so important. I want to go back maybe a little bit and talk about the other reasons maybe people are gardening. And I don't know if this is maybe what I suspect, because I'm anxious and sad and maybe a little bit depressed, is that I think there's such a great mental health component to just getting your hands in the soil and figuring out what to grow and sort of planning what it looks like. It takes up space in your head that might otherwise be filled with, anxious thoughts. And so I find that sort of very helpful. Do you think?
Yeah. I'm hearing from a lot of people that they're doing it obviously for the mental health and emotional benefits. And part of it, I know, certainly for us, is doing something that feels like it's a little more that we can take agency with and have a little more control in a time when we can control so little. And I think that is absolutely what I'm hearing from a lot of friends is why they're doing it. And it's not that people have more time, because everyone I know just is absolutely slammed, right? because they're, again, like you said, they're working at home, they're teaching at home, but it seems to be really important activity right now, and I'm really excited about it. And and what you said about not going back, I think that is really important, because I feel that if you had told me in December that working conditions in packing houses would be leading the national evening news, I would have been kind of incredulous. And so what I feel now is that the scales are falling off people's eyes, and we can't unsee what we've seen. And so I hope that going forward that we are going to proceed in ways that are more equitable and more sustainable and more intentional and thoughtful. And I know when I think about public policies that I'd like to see come out of that, World War I, they had some interesting food policies. And, one of the things they had in World War I is they had a national gardening curriculum through the Federal Bureau of Education. Right?
Wow.
Who would have thought?
Right.
And it's amazing. And so the name is not good for now. It was called the United States School Garden Army. So you wouldn't want that name now. But the idea of having a national curriculum that focused on climate, environment, food production, human health, social and environmental justice and equity, and helping people learn more about the food system and become more active participants in it. I'd love to see that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm wondering if that's something that can spread to not just elementary or K through 12 schools, but also universities who so even places that are not that don't have food studies programs or agriculture programs. It would be so great to have gardens on every campus and gardens outside every hospital. And I mean, I know our friend Robert Graham was a leader in getting Lenox Hill to have its first garden on the rooftop. But I want that, my hope is that it expands beyond schools, that, there are no more front yard lawns anymore, right? That we have, places for food production that makes sense in whatever community you live in.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, I think those are also the good things that you could take from particularly the World War I Victory Garden program, because they encouraged school, home, community, and even workplace gardens. And there were local and policies in place that eased private property restrictions so that people could garden on railroad easements or utility easements, that you could garden on vacant lots. And I think that, I agree with you. I think it can't just be school. It needs to be an ethos that goes across all aspects of our lives. And like you suggested, some sort of lifelong education program that spirals up. And so I'm actually excited about the potential, because I feel like things are really going to change. And I'm not even just looking at gardening. I'm looking at people's over the top interest in bread baking, in in backyard
sourdough.
Right? And sewing. All these people are, taking their sewing machines out of the closet or the cabinet or the garage. And it was really interesting. I love Nathaniel Johnson, the grist journalist. And he actually had a tweet the other day about butter churning. And there were so many people jumping in saying, yeah, I'm doing it. And I think that actually this whole thing about, life skills, and we used to do more of that in
home economics, that's we used to, I never took those classes because I thought that was for, I don't know what I thought that was for. I looked down on the kids who took it. I want to be honest. And now I wish I learned more of those skills as I became older. But, my mom was always so sad because like I didn't want to learn how to sew and I didn't want to learn how to can. And this is, coming from a woman who would, can't put anything in a jar, my mom. So I think having those skill sets is really important, not just during a pandemic, but just having, sort of the ability to know how to do things, to feed yourself, to preserve food. I think there's a real need because of this interest in baking. We need the infrastructure again in place where every sort of community has a mill that's, making flour available, because you can't find regular flour on grocery store shelves or online anymore because of all.
So I have to tell you, my community has, like a lot of communities, right? And the whole barter system, the whole sort of resurgence of barter, really interesting. And the items that people are seeking most on this barter system are flour, yeast, and gardening supplies and plant material.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So that reminds me, when we first started this conversation, there's been such a run on seeds, Rose, and a lot of seed companies have sort of, were surprised and shocked, and many have had to close their doors because they couldn't keep up. They're, I think folks are set for seeds this year because of that sort of run, but it's next year that I'm worried about. So I don't want to be naive in this assumption that oh great, everyone's gardening now, including me. But I'm worried about next year. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that that's a legitimate worry. And I think that we need to do everything we can to be educating people about seed saving and to support all those organizations that are selling seeds that are at scale, that are selling heirloom varieties and seed libraries. I think everything that we can do to support that, because I think that's a concern. And I think that also, leads into some potential policies, public policies, about can certain programs be changed to enable people or added to access resources for gardening, because not everyone has even access to land.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. So, I mean, people don't have access to land. I think seed is definitely going to be an issue.
Right. And I think that bartering system that you mentioned before could become very important for how people decide what to grow. And I think, like every year when folks have a garden, they have too many tomatoes or they have too much zucchini. And if communities can sort of coordinate efforts and say, hey, you grow X, Y, Z, and I'll grow these other things, and then we'll trade, so that there's not, an abundance of just a few things, and so that doesn't lead to food loss and food waste.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And that's actually one of the public policy recommendations in my book, is that communities really need to do food shed planning, right? Yeah. That people need to know what is in their community, what's available, mapping assets and gardens as community assets. Right. And there's some places obviously that do that, and they're obviously very strong food policy councils. But I think that coordinating community growing would be an important thing. And even at the garden level, like a community garden doing that. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful thing. And then also, I think another thing that we need to think about mapping is basically commercial kitchen space, because not everyone has, canning equipment and also that knowledge. And so how do we do that? And is there a way, like, there are a lot of churches that have kitchens, but they're not all, commercially licensed.
Right.
And is there a way, or is there sort of a period where we honor food safety, but we also make it easier for people to access resources in the community to accomplish these goals?
Or is this, I love that idea, or is this a way to help keep restaurants, sort of in business too, by, folks get together, pay a small fee, and restaurateurs and chefs help them do that processing that's necessary to preserve food, that's another point I want to get in with you into with you, Rose. This idea, I think we've looked down on preserved foods for so long, or processed foods. Folks have stayed away from canned food, and they've, sort of dismissed frozen food for a long time. There's this cult of fresh instead of, and which I love fresh food. I think we all do. We all talking about CSAs and farmers markets. But, if you can talk, people during World War I, they preserved a lot of the food that they were growing because there was a lack of refrigeration. And so, how does that come into play here now in 2020?
Well, yeah, World War I and World War II, right? A huge food preservation efforts, and in fact, in World War II, the War Industries Board, which sort of organized manufacturing for the war effort, they made a provision for canning equipment, right? Because it was seen as being so essential. And I think that food preservation is really important. And, a lot of people don't know how to do it because they haven't done it, right? And so extension programs now, many of those extension programs have master food preserver programs. So if your community has a master food preserver program, there are volunteers in the community who know how to do it. And I also think too, there is knowledge resident in communities. I've got some friends who are, older and maybe came from rural areas who still process food at home on a regular basis, right?
Absolutely.
But you just have to be really careful about food safety.
For sure. And those are skills that might seem scary at first to learn, but they're easy once you've done it. Once you've canned your first sort of beets or tomatoes, you get into a groove, and you don't worry about, you still have to be very cautious of how you're doing it, but you don't worry about it as much.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I'm going to really miss this year. I'm going to miss county fairs.
Right.
Because, county fairs are a wonderful place to go, and state fairs to learn more about these sort of practical life skills relating to food and agriculture. And I saw today Ohio State Fair is canceled, and I know that my county fair, which is very large actually, and we have a good, we have a solid, as agricultural industry here in Ventura County, and our county fair is canceled this year. It's sad.
Yeah, it is sad. It's sad that we're losing all of that sort of knowledge transfer that could happen, and the sort of momentum and excitement that creates around food for people, who are not typically in agriculture. I'm wondering, we've seen such a sort of, and this is something worldwide, like a decline in extension services for all sorts of farmers as agriculture becomes bigger and bigger, or there's not as much sort of investment in smallholder agriculture in many countries. Extension has sort of been replaced by sort of agribusiness in some cases. Do you think that there's an opportunity to sort of reinvigorate our extension services, not just in the United States because of COVID-19, but really worldwide?
Yeah, I do. And I feel like for extension, we're at a real, and that extension model, we're at a point of real danger and real opportunity.
Right.
What we are seeing right now, not just in the United States, but you said across the world, is an absolute tsunami of interest in these sort of things that Extension does really well
Right.
and has a lot of knowledge about. And I think that is absolutely incredible that a public resource like Extension is aligning with public need and interest so much. What I think the point of danger is that with the hits on these state budgets, and as you know, Extension in this country, it's federal funding, it's state funding through land grants, and then the tripartite piece is typically county funding. And I'm so worried about the cuts that might be coming down through the federal government, through state, through the land grants. I mean, I think the potential for cuts is enormous. And so one of the things I think that if the public values these services, they're going to have to, speak up. And I also think too that it's there's been a decline of public investment in this for a long time.
Right.
And I also worry too about these terrific programs that we have, like the Foreign Agricultural Service, where we go and work with other countries, and the Extension Service in other countries. What's going to happen? I'm really worried about that right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. I am too. I mean, after spending so much time on the ground in so many countries in the global south and seeing that lack of extension, and see how farmers have to either create their own networks or work with nonprofits, or again, get that information from agribusiness, which, is usually trying to sell them something. Now is really the time for governments to invest in public extension services so that those farmers can not only survive through this pandemic, but thrive much later on.
I agree. And I do have to tell you, a couple of things that I think potentially could be of interest. There is a researcher at UC Davis named Mark LaBelle, and he and his then graduate student, who's no longer a graduate student, they did some incredible research around how farmers who are interested in sustainability created networks of information to share information using social technologies.
Right.
Like Twitter. And I think their case study was maybe sustainable wine growers, like grape producers for the wine industry. So it could be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. That lots of different ways to share information than even, as you mentioned, 10 years ago, and especially 20 years ago, or again, during World War I and World War II. Rose, what do you want people most to know about sort of this movement towards more sort of personal and community gardening?
What I want people to know is that this is going to be really important moving forward. It's going to be important for all of us to do this activity, to have these skills. I think there's going to be a potential for many of us, not only individually, but in collective settings, to help produce food that can help people in our communities. And because that's another big thing that I'm worried right now is about food distribution and access and hunger, and what we're seeing, with school districts heroically filling the breach in terms of, getting boxes of food out to families and feeding kids despite this. But I think it's really an essential thing for us to do and to know how to do. And Abraham Lincoln, in 1859, he told a group of Wisconsin farmers when he was campaigning for president that, to paraphrase, as long as people knew how to cultivate a plot of land, any size plot of land, that we would be free from oppression of all kinds, including kings and moneylenders. And I think that it's an essential skill, and I hope that people will continue to embrace it, continue to share what they're learning with other people, and use it as a place to build community, to be inclusive, to be equitable in communities.
Absolutely. Freedom, empowerment, all of those things. What an eloquent way to feel that. Where can people find more information about your work, Rose?
So people can find more information about my work at my website, which is rosehayden-smith.com. No hyphen, all run together. You can actually find my book from the publisher at McFarland Publishing. And I also am on Twitter as UC Food Observer, and also Victory Grower. And I blog all over the place.
That's great. That's great. My final question, Rose, because you get to meet so many interesting people and have this very wide network, is there a particular person who's inspiring you the most right now?
Oh my gosh. Well, I love what Leah Penniman is doing. And I go in and check her social accounts every morning. I love that. I also am really inspired by master gardeners right now everywhere. I am really grateful for the very serious news reporting that's being done right now about the food system and the many crises going on in the food system. I mean, I'm grateful for that. But I think in terms of, being inspired, just looking at what people are growing is inspiring me right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's such a good excuse to look at Instagram accounts for, a couple hours, couple minutes every day, because it is.
Yes. Yeah. And I tell you, these master gardener programs, these are volunteer driven.
Right.
And I just see these people, making all these posts, and so generous, so wonderful. And also Ron Finley's masterclass.
Right. Great shout out to Ron Finley, the guerrilla gardener in LA. He's such an amazing human and such an inspiring leader.
Yeah.
Rose, thanks so much for joining me today. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. And I hope everyone will join me on our next episode when I'll be talking to Lawrence Haddad, the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Thank you so much, Rose. It was really nice to see you. Please stay well.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You stay well too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.